Hey everybody, my name is Sanj. I am a product manager at Audible, and this talk is going to be about product management pitfalls and how to avoid them. So, there are five big takeaways that I want you to get out of this talk. Um, the first one is the road to PMing isn't always straight. So I'm going to talk about my own experience and how I arrived to becoming a product manager. The second one is how to influence cross functional teams. And thirdly, we're going to talk about owning the why and not the how, and why it's important to understand that distinction as a PM. And then finally, we're going to talk about what it looks like to actually practice customer obsession. So let's get started with just talking about my own experience becoming a product manager. And I really started in product way before I had any idea what a PM was. So I graduated UC Berkeley with a degree in physics. I only got a bachelor's degree, so I wasn't going off to do any research, or I didn't really know what to do with that degree. So I also was obsessed with music and sound design, and I ended up getting a job at a video game company doing music and sound. Um, and it was actually a very small company with only 5 people. There was a grant writer, and there was a Flash developer. This is back in the mid 2000s. There was a designer, and there was me, who was kind of like the sound guy, but also just kind of a catch-all for anything that needed to happen. Because I was the youngest person on the team, I was scrappy, and I just tried to be the connective tissue for everybody in that team to get work done. Um, so yeah, my role was sound designer and composer, but I in that role I was doing a lot of documentation. Um, I was helping connect the dots between our action script Flash developer and our designer, and just kind of intuitively, just kind of organically, sort of doing product stuff before I knew what product management was. So halfway through that experience, the iPad came out, and our our company was like obsessed with creating products for this iPad because we were an edutainment software company, and we wanted to make educational games on this new platform. And so I actually became the Apple guy, because I was the only person at work with an Apple computer. And in that experience, I taught myself iOS development. And uh, after 3.5 years at this company, uh, our grant was up. We operated under an NIH grant, and the money was no longer there. So I recasted myself, rebranded myself, I should say, as an iOS developer, and I started freelancing as a developer for different events and different digital agencies. And I was living in the Bay Area at the time, but I actually started doing work for a company called Appetizer Mobile in Midtown Manhattan. And eventually, I moved to New York City. I became that company's one of their first hires, and eventually, that company's team grew, and I was involved in uh, as a hiring manager for a lot of the folks who joined that company. And during my stay at Appetizer, I worked on a lot of different products. Um, it was an agency, so there's a lot of turnaround. There was a lot of different industry domains that we're servicing. It was media, it was the medical industry. There's all kinds of stuff going on, and it was a valuable experience because I it taught me how to get ideas out quickly and see them to a launch. So just having that cadence of putting things down on paper, bringing them from concept to design to release. That was something that was uh, very important to do quickly at this particular company. Very small company too, by the way. But I wouldn't say I actually became a product manager until my next job, where for the first time I had the role of product manager. Up until this I had been working at very small companies where I wore many hats. But then when I started working at Viacom, I started doing things that are classically product work. Customer obsession, letting the data motivate your decisions. So at Viacom, I worked on a preschool app that became the highest grossing streaming app for preschool. That app was called Noggin, and and that was the first experience where I kind of learned what customer obsession was about and uh, what product management was about. Up until this time, I had come from a more of a scrappier development background, and I was used to getting things out there quickly. But now it was important and it was necessary to be able to make decisions that are based on customer feedback and based on uh, analytics from customer behavior, as opposed to just shipping things because they sounded like a good idea. And that is really the crux of what product management is you need to be the voice of the customer. And one of the pitfalls I see about, and we're going to talk about this later, um, is product managers oftentimes uh, feel responsible for every aspect of a product, um, whether it's the design or the implementation. But really, the thing that product is actually responsible for is the why. And then the design and the implementation is is how you're doing it. But the why should be like, why are we doing this? Why is this important? What are the business metrics we're trying to push? Um, if a product manager needs to be able to explain the why and back it up with data and back it up with the voice of the customer. Um, so after working at Viacom, I actually started my own company, and this is actually something I recommend anybody coming from an engineering background to do. If you're coming from a development background, you want to get into product management, I highly recommend building your own product from scratch, just bootstrapping your own idea, whether it's something that you can do on the weekends or after work. Um, it really just shows that entrepreneurial kind of exercise of bringing something out of thin air and bringing it and presenting it to the world. Uh, Shows a lot of initiative, and there's a ton of product experience that you get out of that, because as an engineer, you can start thinking about problems that you want to solve. You can start thinking about customers who are going to use your product and why they might use your product and what is going to differentiate your product from competitors. And these are all decisions you that you will have to make in building your piece of software. And these are all decisions that product managers have to make all the time. So if you can do that, when you start interviewing at other companies, you can show bridge the gap between, like, they're going to love you because of your development background, your technical experience, um, but if you can show that you've also have this customer obsession and are able to take work with ambiguity and crystallize a plan out of nothing, and start building and start iterating and start getting feedback from customers, and that could go a long ways in showing that as an engineer you could be a good candidate for product management. um, so let me just revisit my notes. Okay, so we talked about how product management the path to product becoming a product management can be a windy one. Like I started out as a composer, I ended up getting into development work, and then I kind of worked at as a catch-all for all these like small scrappy companies, and eventually started working at bigger companies where they had a well-defined product role. But the the connective tissue here is that I at any role that I was at, I usually became the guy who could explain why we were doing something the way we were doing it. And this sense of ownership at whatever role you're in right now, if you can bring that kind of sense of ownership and that complete sense, that holistic approach to what you're doing, then you can start gaining product experience right away without having the title as the title product manager. So the second thing I wanted to talk about is influencing cross-functional teams. And coming from an engineering background, one of the pitfalls you might fall into as a product manager is that you might feel like you're an authority on the technical details on how something should be done. And in fact, you might find yourself in the weeds of the how, and versus the why. And that's not where good product managers really want to be, because good product managers are obsessed with solving customer problems and also solving problems for stakeholders and moving the needle on business KPIs. If your mental bandwidth is always directed towards solving problems, technical problems, then you're doing more technical work, and you might be better suited for what at Amazon we call it an SDM job, or a software development manager job, where you need to be a great communicator and you need to be extremely technically proficient. But that's not really what the role of product is about. You need to have some technical proficiency, enough that you can talk and digest, what a conversation with a technical person. That's going to help you a lot. But you don't want to be thinking in that way all the time. You want to be mostly thinking about the customer, and you also want to be very analytical and be able to digest numbers, so that can help you motivate why you're prioritizing your backlog, or why you're laying out your roadmap the way you're laying it out. So let's talk a little bit more about owning the why versus the how. So what does it mean to own the why? So the why is the reason why you're launching this product or you're working on a feature. And the reason why you're doing this there should be some real collateral that proves that that the why is worth doing. And that could be feedback online, like Reddit posts, things that competitors are doing. What's probably really valuable, especially when you're communicating with stakeholders, is to be able to go into your analytics platform, whether it's Adobe Omniture or Google Analytics, Firebase. There are a lot of different analytic engines, but you want to be proficient in at least one analytics engine that's going to help you talk to your stakeholders and back up your prioritization and your roadmap with real numbers, with real data. Anytime you can go into those kinds of meetings with charts, it really helps with your credibility. And then when you're explaining these sorts of things to designers and engineers, you want to go into these kind of ideation meetings with this true sense of of the problem that you're trying to solve, why we're doing this. You don't want to be that prescriptive when it comes to the solution. You have design experts and you have technical experts on your team that should be very involved in the solutioning of the problem, that's going to help you with solve the why. So yeah, you want to rely on your designers and your engineers to really chime in, and you don't want to be that product manager that has the kickoff meeting being the full-fledged feature. Product management is related to product design, but it isn't. You shouldn't be responsible for the whole product design. You shouldn't be going into a meeting with, especially if it's the first meeting that you're having with your design partners and your engineers, with a very prescriptive uh, way of doing things, where you're just like, this is the solution. Um, that's really off-putting to uh, people on your team who are going to be very talented, and they themselves are going to be problem solvers. So uh, sometimes product managers who are coming from a design background or an engineering background have this bias towards action and really just want to start wireframing and coming up to with the solution by themselves. And really, product management needs to be, you need to be a collaborator, and you need to influence without authority. So you can bring your design team, your cross-functional team of engineers and designers together to come up with a solution to the problem. But you don't want to dictate what the solution is. But that doesn't mean that you don't influence the direction of where the solution goes. But any feedback that you give needs to be given from the perspective of the customer and the problem that you're trying to solve. So in this iterative solutioning process, your designers are going to come back with some wireframes or a mock-up. If you're lucky, you might have engineers who are able to quickly produce a prototype. And one of the pitfalls of product management is you might see something and you just, from an aesthetic point of view, you just don't like it. You yourself don't like it. But you need to be disciplined in how you frame your feedback. It shouldn't just, you're not anyone's boss in this case. You're the voice of the customer. So you really want to frame your feedback from that perspective, of the customer's perspective. So if you see a solution that doesn't really work, you need to explain why it doesn't work for the problem that you're trying to solve, and not focus on, well, I just don't like the color of that button, or I just don't like the way this looks. That kind of subjective feedback, you may have it, and it may be legitimate, and you may have your intuition telling you that this solution isn't going to work. But I think when you're communicating with your team, you want to make sure you're framing that feedback from the perspective of the customer and the perspective of the problem statement. So we talked about owning the why and not the how. The how is the collaborative piece, and the how should be shared amongst your designers and engineers. And but you really just want to own the why. That's your main job as a product manager. And so let's talk about that a little bit more, just owning the why and what it looks like to be customer obsessed. A lot you probably have learned in your product school that product managers are the voice of the customer, and they need to be that present voice in letting everyone know, like, well, are we solving this problem for a customer? That's the job of a product. But in practice, like, what does this actually look like? How do you channel the voice of the customer? It's actually something that's very hard to do, because I know right now, and especially now with COVID, we're all working remotely. But even when you're going to the office, like, you may not be around your customer all the time. Your customer may be a very specific cohort, a very specific demographic of people who may not be around. So how do you channel that voice? Well, there's a few resources. I'll start out with the easiest ones. If you're working at a product that has some scale, there might be a Reddit channel where people are talking about your products. So that's a great way to learn about your customers, to just read app reviews, uh, read through Reddit, and take those comments very seriously. But at the same time, keep in mind that any of that feedback, uh, there isn't a whole lot of clarity in how that feedback looks like at scale. Like it could be just a very loud customer that may not be representative of your entire customer base. So you definitely want to look for trends as well. But what's even more valuable than just having one-off, uh, you know, uh, 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 posts from customers is being able to go into your analytics platform like Adobe Analytics and look at truly how your customer is interacting with your product and find opportunities to move drive certain behaviors. If you could start with the data, that's usually the best way and the most compelling way to convince your cross-functional team and convince your stakeholders that you ought to do X. So data is one. Just searching for comments and feedback and posts online is another one. Um, Actually talking to your customer is something that's really hard to do. And if you're lucky, you may work at a company where you have a UX research team whose job it is to do this very thing, because it's extremely hard to do and it takes a lot of time. If you're at a smaller company, you still have to do this, and that's one of the first things that may not happen if you're at a much smaller company. And I know from my experience when I was working at the digital agency, we were focused on just churning out product, and we weren't really roping in our customer or our targeted customer to see if our products were delighting them, if they were solving the problems that we were trying to solve for a customer. That's something that's so crucial to the success of a product. Is you want to be able to be early on really see if you're addressing the problem before you invest too much time and energy in a certain direction. If you can get some wireframes or a prototype in front of a customer and you can watch them play with it, that is the best. But getting a customer physically in the same space as you, or even on a VoIP call, is challenging these days. And recruitment it's a job in and of itself. So if you don't have those resources at your company, you can always just talk to your wife. You could talk to your family. You could talk to your friends. Make sure that if you're working on, especially if it's something that's just you is B to C, and most people might find value from it, like share it, and but also be conscious of any kind of NDA constraints that you might have. Again, it's a very tough thing to do, but it's totally necessary, mandatory to do in order to be a good PM. If you're lucky enough to have a UXR division in your organization, make sure that you are working closely with them, because they're actually fulfilling a really crucial role that's central to product management. They are capturing the voice of the customer. And as a PM, you are the voice of the customer within the organization. So if your UXR group is conducting a focus group, or if they're sharing learnings, make sure you're reading that stuff and you're responding to it, and that you're part of their process. A lot of times, and I actually see this even in my current role sometimes, that UXR is like the learnings that they're capturing are seen as suggestions and product may go in their own direction. And that's really not, getting the full value out of that very important group. If you have folks at your company that are talking to your customer, um, then you should be working closely with those folks. If you don't have those folks, then you should be taking on that job yourself. And uh, you can write, you can, compose Google surveys to do that. Uh, you can also leverage different agencies that will help you recruit too. There's a budget for that. But yeah, customer obsession is really hard, but it's so important because you don't want to invest, a quarter or a year's worth of work building something only to realize that uh, you didn't get it right. And you could have gotten it right if you just looped in the customer earlier in the process. It's going to save you time and your company's uh, money and resources in the end if you loop in the customer. All right, so that is the talk. I thank you for listening, and yeah, I hope you got something out of it. So just to recap, um, we talked about how the road to PMing isn't always a straight one. So if you're not a PM now, look for opportunities within your current role to start, becoming a PM. You can always, look for opportunities to gain experience, uh, even if you're not currently a PM. You can do that in with whatever role you're in. It just takes a little bit of initiative, and if you just have that sense of ownership of what you're doing, what your team is doing, um, it can go a long way. And also, if you're, on the technical side, or if you're a designer and you're looking to get into a product role, one of the best ways to gain experience quickly is to just start your own project and just do something on your own and build a product and introduce it to the world. Um, and then we talked about owning the why, not the how. Um, Product is responsible for giving the team and stakeholders reason why they're building something. They shouldn't be in the weeds so much on how it's done. And then finally, we talked about customer obsession. So, customer obsession in practice is really hard, but it's super important, and it's going to save your company time and money in the end. That's it. Thank you again. Bye.